Well, boys, I lost my date at the paint booth. I was about to shoot the sealer coat on my car, and I got the call that the paint booth was unavailable. It's going to be pushed back another week. I had the trailer lined up and everything.
Garage time.
So I will reconvene next week. I'm going to shoot the sealer coat just a day or two prior to actually taking it to the booth. That's going to protect the bodywork while I transport it. And then once I get to the paint booth, I'm going to scuff it really lightly for the best adhesion with the base coat. So that's the plan, guys. Sorry for the delay. I am as disappointed as you guys are. I wanted to have it done this week too. But I'm going to switch gears and work on some wiring. So once the car is painted, one of the first things to do to make it drivable is to work on things that go through the tunnel. And this wire harness is one of those things. I removed this because I did some welding for lowering the seat mounts and also just cleaning that area up. But you know, this is the harness that goes through the tunnel. It needs to be inspected and also repaired. You know, my car was parted out, so this is the engine harness or the harness that comes out the tunnel. This is for the CIS. And you can see it's been completely cut. So I'm not running the CIS, but I want to see if I can salvage at least some of this wiring to make it work for my hot rod. I'm going to focus on the tunnel harness first because this is the one that goes in the car first, and it's the most critical one. So I have my iPad. I have color sort of wiring diagrams available from the workshop manual. Those are electronic. And then I printed out some of the diagrams, same diagrams, but just black and white. I'm going to be going through this list of circuits and determining which ones I need to make sure are there and which ones I can probably eliminate. My car is not going to have the air conditioning system. A lot of the creature comforts of this car aren't going to be there, so there's no point in restoring something I'm not going to use. I will probably just take it out. Okay, first glance at this harness, I mean, most of the protective gear is still in pretty good shape. I think it's missing a little bit of tape right there. This side here, this is where it comes out of the tunnel. This has this tape wrapped around it. It's like a heavy vinyl or rubber tape. And let's see, I think this is where it attaches to the fuses. These have all been taken apart. It's interesting twine here holding a few things together. I don't know if that's factory or not. I told you this car had been left for dead, and I wasn't kidding. I mean, it was parted out in a hurry. Just going to give it a light scrub down with some just soap and water. Okay, now we can see these colors of all these wires, and I believe this would connect to the rear electrical panel in the engine compartment, but I'm going to start verifying what each of these wires are for and see which ones I really need to keep. Start with this heavy yellow wire. Okay, I've gone through the process of determining where all these wires are supposed to go, really just based on the color diagrams that are provided in the factory workshop manual. And I've just temporarily labeled each of the terminals so I know sort of where it goes and what it's for. So this particular connector has the little piece that's broken. I think it'll still operate, but these are, for instance, the oil sender connection for the oil tank, and then the tail lights on the, which would be the passenger right. And then this is at the rear of the car. All these wires here, which are cut, are some important things like You know, this heavy gauge wire is for the starter solenoid. This is the tachometer. This is for the generator charge indicator. This is a blower motor. There's, I guess on some cars they had blowers on the engine, but my car definitely won't have that. So just various things labeled. This is one I couldn't figure out. But all of these things are somewhat important, like the parking brake switch, some taillight stuff back here too. So I've determined that most of these wires need to be retained and lengthened. So rather than splice some of the important wires, like this one is important, carries a lot of current, rather than splice that one, I'm probably going to replace that whole wire and replace a lot of this sleeving is available from local suppliers like McMaster. This is like 35 millimeters. Yeah, probably 35 millimeters outer diameter. And the thickness is 1 millimeter. And this tape line shows where that starts. So I'll keep this for reference, but that covers the portion that goes under the seat pans. The wires inside the tunnel area look really good. These are, you know, like brand new on the inside. You know, this sleeving really does protect it. Even though it's sort of worn, you know, thin in a few spots, and this part here had gotten some heat damage in the past, but the wires are okay. So I'm gonna replace this PVC tubing and this rubber tubing with new. And I also, you know, wanted to remove any wires that I just know that I'm not gonna need. So I can do that now. And also some of the wires are cut short. So I'm thinking about ways to extend the wires. Okay, I mentioned before that I didn't want to splice any of the high current wires. Things like this yellow wire are for the starter solenoid, and I don't want it to be problematic in the future. So I was going to just replace this entire yellow wire, which is why I sort of cut up some of the sleeving around this. But I also realized that I'm not going to use the rear electrical panel. The rear electrical panel is for things like the ignition system, the CDI ignition. It also has the voltage regulator, which I think I will need, but that doesn't need to be mounted on the factory regulator panel. And it has things like relays for the rear window defogger, and just a couple other things that I really don't need. So I'm gonna delete that entire electrical panel. In fact, I don't even have it. It didn't come with my car. So rather than go into that stock configuration, I'm gonna be using an electronic management system anyways, probably Motec, and it's gonna be located on the passenger compartment on the other side of the firewall where I cut that access panel. So all the wiring is gonna be modified anyways, because this is a restomod. I'm not using the CIS K-tronic ejection, any of that stuff. So I'm using my own induction system, and that really changes a lot of things. And because I'm not gonna use that electrical panel, everything is connecting to an area that's closer to the point that the harness exits the tunnel. So even though these wires are cut, they're actually plenty long enough to go where the new management system will be. So I don't actually need to extend anything other than the license plate lights and the driver's side tail lights. That's what some of these wires are. These are cut short. And it also is missing the connector. Like this is for the passenger side. This connector is still salvageable, but there should be one just like this on the passenger side. So I looked to see if I can buy that connector. It's like $200 brand new. So I'm not gonna do that. I am going to look for a used connector or potentially even repurpose something from inside the car. This is the defroster stuff, and I'm not going to be using air conditioning or any of this sort of vent stuff. I will probably have a blower just to defrost the window, but I can just use a manual switch for that. A little bit cleaner look on the dashboard, but I just noticed that it has this connector, which is identical to the taillight connector. So rather than buy a brand new one, maybe I can repurpose this one. I'm going to look into the color of the wires here and also make sure that this is something I just don't need. Or I can buy a used one. There's a couple swap meets coming up here in February. So in terms of doing anything to this harness at the moment, this yellow wire is not a problem because it's going to go direct to the starter. The way the factory did it, it went direct to the license panel, and then the engine harness went back to the starter. So it's really a kind of a longer route than I'm going to be using. So I'm going to be going right to the starter on this, and so I'll have to maybe cut some of this tubing so it breaks out a little sooner. And those kind of modifications are going to suit me just fine. I'm trying to maintain the factory wiring diagram as much as possible. I'm trying to retain the factory colors. I'm just not using all the components. So it's really about kind of deleting things and then adding my own engine management system with its own wire harness. It'll be standalone. I do need to get power for it, and there is power in this harness to power that management system. So that's where I'm at. I don't think there's much else I can do. I've already ordered the extra sleeving, both this bigger sleeving and the PVC sleeving, so I can put this back together the way it was. Also, all the monitoring wires like the oil, pressure, temperature, all that stuff is going to be attached to the engine management computer anyways. So rather than extend the wires to go to the engine and then have another set of wires go to the engine management, I'm going to use these wires that have already been cut. They'll go right to the engine management computer, and then wire an engine harness that'll go from the computer to the engine will take care of all those connections. So I don't need to go all the way to the oil pressure sender. I just need to get this to the engine management computer. I'm just going to remove wires I know I don't need. This is for the blower motor. Well, this has been a nice departure from sanding, even though I really wanted to paint the car this week. That's going to happen next week, fingers crossed. I did learn a lot about the electrical system today and also discovered some parts that I need to look into, purchasing, and I did get the sleeving ordered. So this thing should be salvageable with a little bit of TLC. Thanks again for watching. See you next week.